You wake up to the sound of goats. Not charming, pastoral goats. No. One of them has a wheeze like an asthmatic accordion and is licking your foot. The other has just peed suspiciously close to your pillow, which, by the way, is not a pillow at all, but a half-rotted bag of hay that smells like 3 generations of mildew and desperation. Welcome to your morning in a medieval roadside inn. You're not a noble. You're not a knight. You're just you. A weary traveler, possibly suffering from the 14th century version of gastroenteritis, and you've made the classic mistake of seeking shelter for the night. You might have expected a feather bed, a warm bowl of stew, and a smile from the innkeeper. And sure, you technically received all 3, but the feather bed was actually stuffed with chicken bones, the stew tasted like regret, and the innkeeper's smile involved exactly 4 teeth and an aggressive cough. Also, you had to share your room and your mattress with 2 other strangers in something that may or may not be a flea circus. But you are in the Middle Ages, when the rules of hospitality weren't just customs. They were laws, sacred codes, and occasionally a really bad idea wrapped in the illusion of kindness. And in this world, offering hospitality could mean anything from a lavish banquet to throwing a bucket of rainwater in your face while muttering something vaguely Latin. So before you get comfortable, assuming you haven't already curled up under a blanket of existential dread, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of historically accurate, semi-sarcastic insomnia fuel. Drop a comment below with where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always interesting to see who's lying in bed somewhere in New Jersey while pretending to be a 12th century stable boy with a tapeworm. Right. Back to your glorious morning in this damp hovel. The air smells like wet wood, last night's cabbage stew, and a whiff of unwashed humanity, possibly your own. There are no private rooms unless you're rich. There's no Wi-Fi, just a communal sleeping platform that creaks every time someone breathes. You'd think it would be peaceful out here in the countryside, but no. There's a rooster who thinks it's a town crier and begins yelling at exactly 4:17 a.m. every day. And then there's Brother Thomas, a monk who sleeps next to you and insists on doing his prayers aloud in Latin. Very loudly. Very nasal. You get up, brush straw from your face, and begin your day. Breakfast? A slab of stale bread that could double as a weapon, and something ale because water is, hilariously, considered too dangerous to drink. You consider going outside to relieve yourself, but remember the latrine is just a glorified trench crawling with every medieval disease not yet named by science. Instead, you try to find a quiet corner to think about your life choices. The innkeeper, whose name might be Ulrich or might just be a sound he made once, cheerfully informs you that it's customary to leave a gift for your host. Not money, of course. That would be simple. No, the proper form of gratitude might include a song, a story, or offering to help mend the thatched roof. So now you're standing on a rickety ladder in the rain, trying to sing a ballad you half remember from your childhood while birds mock you from the chimney. Welcome to the deeply confusing and contradictory world of medieval hospitality, where generosity and passive aggression held hands and danced in a circle of lice-infested joy. Let's take a moment to examine what hospitality actually meant in this era, which, spoiler alert, was not always about being nice. It was about status, about obligation, and sometimes it was about making sure your guests didn't curse your house and soil your reputation for the next 3 generations. You see, in the early Middle Ages, especially in places like Anglo-Saxon England or Frankish Gaul, hospitality was more sacred than your marriage vows. And judging by the divorce rates among nobility, that's not a high bar. The guest was considered a representation of the divine, or, at the very least, a person whose ability to exact revenge should not be underestimated. If you turned away a traveler, you risked spiritual damnation, social exile, or the far more immediate consequence of having your barn mysteriously catch fire that night. So you were expected to offer food, drink, a place to sleep, and sometimes, even your own bed. That's right. You would get up and give your guest your own straw-stuffed mattress while you slept on the cold stone floor, rethinking every decision that brought you to this moment. Of course, if you were a peasant, which, statistically speaking, you are, then your hospitality was more symbolic than luxurious. You might offer a corner of the hearth and a bowl of whatever was still edible in your pot. No fresh linens, no cheese plate, just a warmish space near the fire, some porridge, and the chance to avoid being labeled a godless savage. Interestingly, monasteries took this hospitality thing very seriously. Monks, who were basically medieval Arabs in robes, were required to provide shelter to travelers, pilgrims, and sometimes even fleeing criminals. There were literal hospitality rules written into monastic codes. If a guest arrived, the porter would greet them with a bow, wash their feet, yes, actually, and invite them in for a meal. And not just any meal. Monasteries often had better food than local nobles. Mostly because monks had access to spices, gardens, and the divine right to ignore fasting rules when convenient. However, don't imagine a charming retreat. These monastic ghosthouses were functional, cold, and full of the soft sounds of snoring, prayer, and the occasional weeping traveler who just realized they left their one good pair of boots at a roadside ditch 6 miles back. Let's now turn to the nobility. Ah, yes. If you were a guest at a noble estate, you might think you've won the medieval jackpot. There's food, music, and sometimes even real wine instead of vinegar pretending to be wine. But remember, nothing is ever free. Nobles expected gossip, favors, alliances, and, in some cases, a small war declared on their behalf by breakfast. You didn't just eat their food. You became part of the social performance. Every bite you took was a subtle negotiation. Every compliment to the host's daughter could be interpreted as a marriage proposal or an insult to her slightly too prominent chin. You had to laugh at the right jokes, praise the food even if it was suspiciously chewy, and never, never outshine your host. That would be a fatal social misstep. Literally fatal if the wine had been seasoned with something more permanent. And speaking of food, let's discuss the great unspoken rule of medieval hospitality. You do not get to choose the menu. You get what the host gives you. And what they give you might be a culinary nightmare. Eel pie, fish porridge, something that smells like old leather and tastes like damp parchment. Vegetarians? Good luck. Gluten-free? The baker's gonna laugh so hard he'll choke on his barley loaf. Of course, there were the rare generous hosts who truly did enjoy feeding and housing strangers. These were the people whose names you'd pass along to fellow travelers. Go to Lady Ejifu's manor. She gives you real bread and doesn't yell at you for sneezing. But for every Lady Ejifu, there was a Lord Roderick the Flatulent, who made you pay for dinner by listening to his harp solos and stories of how he definitely fought in the Crusades, even though the timeline doesn't quite add up. Let's not forget the inns themselves. Ah yes, the inn. That magical place where hospitality was transactional, but not always transparent. You'd pay a fee, sometimes a few pennies, sometimes a chicken, and in return, you got a meal, a place to sleep, and an 85% chance of acquiring bed bugs. Inns were often loud, chaotic, and filled with travelers, merchants, mercenaries, and people who claimed to be traveling bards but had only learned 3 chords. There were no private bathrooms. No locks on the doors. If someone snuck into your room and stole your only pair of hose, well, that was just the risk you took. Some inns even charge you extra for firewood, for water, or for breathing too loudly. Still awake? Good. We've only scratched the surface of medieval hospitality. We haven't even gotten to the part where dinner etiquette was basically an Olympic sport. Forks didn't exist, everyone shared trenchers, which were basically stale bread plates, and if you used your left hand to eat, you might be accused of being in league with Satan. Sharing a bowl of stew with someone also meant sharing their cold, their lice, and the emotional burden of their life story, which they insisted on telling you between mouthfuls. And cleanliness? Oh, you sweet summer child. There were no hand-washing stations. Maybe, if you were lucky, a servant would come around with a bowl of water before the meal. But more often than not, you wiped your hands on your tunic, the tablecloth, or the dog. Because yes, dogs were often allowed at the table. And sometimes they were better behaved than the guests. So now, as you curl back into your scratchy wool blanket and try to ignore the scratching sounds in the thatch above your head, spoiler, it's rats, you begin to understand why hospitality in the Middle Ages was both revered and dreaded. It was a sacred duty wrapped in obligation, discomfort, and the occasional bout of diarrhea. You try to sleep, but you can still hear someone whisper chanting in Latin, and you realize, with a soft sigh, that you never actually paid the innkeeper. Too late now. You'll either be cursed, murdered in your sleep, or just subtly overcharged next time. That's medieval hospitality for you, generous, dangerous, and never quite what you hoped it would be. You wake up with someone's elbow in your eye socket and the distinct feeling that at least one of your toes has gone numb. It's still dark, but technically that means nothing, because your room has no windows. The sun could be rising, falling, or casually imploding, and you wouldn't know unless you climbed onto the roof, which you won't, because the ladder is missing 2 rungs and optimism is not your strong suit. You slowly untangle yourself from the human jigsaw puzzle of medieval communal sleeping, and remember that last night, you fell asleep to the gentle lullaby of someone vomiting in a corner. Not out of sickness. Just dinner. Your host stew had the consistency of lukewarm wallpaper paste and a flavor profile best described as dirt forward. You suspect the meat was either really old mutton or really young disappointment. But hospitality, remember, is sacred. And so, with aching limbs and a vague sense of betrayal, you rise to face another day under the ancient and surprisingly complicated code of medieval hospitality, a world where being the host was both an honor and a logistical nightmare, and being a guest could mean anything from welcome friend to surprise witness in a land dispute. Now, let's rewind a bit and talk about where all this madness began. Long before medieval Europe perfected the art of uncomfortable hospitality, cultures across the ancient world had already been deeply invested in the practice of letting strangers into their homes and pretending not to resent it. From ancient Mesopotamia to the frozen fjords of North Scandinavia, hospitality wasn't just polite, it was a matter of life, death, and serious reputation points. In Homeric Greece, for example, the concept of xenia, sacred guest friendship, was so important that Zeus himself was considered its divine overseer. That's right, king of the gods, lord of the sky, and part-time Airbnb manager. If you violated the rules of xenia, you weren't just a jerk, you were blasphemous. And given the Greek gods' reputation for dramatic punishment, you could expect everything from a rain of frogs to waking up as a shrub. Fast forward to the medieval world, and while the religious framework changed, with Christianity and Islam both developing their own robust concepts of charitable hospitality, the anxiety remained. In a world where roads were dangerous, communication was slow, and wolves were a legitimate travel hazard, offering shelter to a stranger was a way to prove your virtue, show off your wealth, and possibly spy on your neighbors. Hospitality was also a legal requirement in many places. In Ireland, the Brehon laws stated that travelers must be offered food, shelter, and protection. If you turned away a guest in need, you could be fined, shamed, or magically cursed, which, frankly, feels like a very Irish combination of consequences. In Islamic societies, especially during the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate, hospitality was elevated to a refined art. A traveler could expect to be fed, sheltered, and treated with respect for up to 3 days, after which the host was allowed to gently and with dignity kick them out. Generosity was not just good manners. It was a religious duty. And unlike in Europe, where generosity sometimes involved stale bread and passive aggression, the Muslim world often saw lavish spreads, storytelling, and a cultural expectation that the guest be treated like royalty, even if they smelled like horse sweat and camel farts. Meanwhile, in medieval Europe, especially during the feudal period, hospitality evolved into a strange blend of genuine care, social maneuvering, and sheer chaos. Lords and ladies maintained extensive guest halls. These weren't just for friends or family. They were open to pilgrims, traveling merchants, diplomats, and random nobles who'd heard a rumor that your cook made decent pigeon pie. Hosting was expensive, exhausting, and entirely unavoidable, unless you wanted to be known as a stingy little weasel who probably bathed too often and worshipped the devil. And speaking of pilgrims, oh boy, the medieval pilgrimage industry turned hospitality into a full-blown economy. Pilgrims traveled to holy sites across Europe, clutching relics, ulcers, and vague hopes of forgiveness. And they needed places to stay. Monasteries, hospices, and even entire towns developed around the business of serving these dusty, smelly, and frequently underfunded souls. Some pilgrims brought diseases. Others brought stories. Occasionally, one would drop dead on the doorstep, which, depending on your region, might earn you divine favor or a fine for improper corpse disposal. There were entire guides, literal books, advising hosts on how to manage guests without losing their minds or their dignity. For example, Le Ménagier de Paris, a 14th-century household manual written by a monk to his teenage wife, Eu, included detailed advice on how to serve guests while still upholding your family's honor and not poisoning anyone accidentally or intentionally. These guides laid out a few key principles. First, the guest must be greeted with grace, offered the best chair, and never, under any circumstances, forced to eat with the servants. Second, always provide warm water for hand washing, unless you want to be compared unfavorably to a goat. And third, conversation is essential, ideally flattering, but not too flattering, lest it become suspicious. You wanted your guest to feel important, but not that important. After all, you still had to share your bread, your wine, and probably your chamber pot. Now, let's talk about sleeping arrangements. The concept of a guest room didn't quite exist yet. What you had was a guest space, a corner of the hall, a platform in the barn, or a tent if the estate was fancy and someone remembered how to pitch one. You, as a guest, were expected to be grateful. And quiet. Very quiet. Snoring too loudly could earn you a midnight relocation to the pigsty, which, ironically, was often warmer than the hall. And God help you if you snored in a monastery. Monks were devoted to silence, prayer, and passive judgment. The rule of Saint Benedict instructed monks to treat all guests as Christ, but it did not specifically say they had to like them. So while you were technically welcome, don't expect a second helping of lentils or a warm smile. You'd get what you were given. And if that was a sermon and a wooden plank to sleep on, you'd better be grateful. Of course, not all guests behaved themselves. Some overstayed their welcome. Some stole silverware. Some flirted with the host's spouse, accidentally insulted the cook's turnips, or tried to pay for their supper with a goat and a sob story. That's when the darker side of hospitality came out. Because while the rules said guests must be welcomed, they didn't say how nicely they had to be sent away. The art of disinviting someone was subtle. You might serve them cold food. Move them to a drafty sleeping spot. Stop washing their bowl between meals. Or, in extreme cases, you could just start talking about plague rumors and demonic livestock until they got the hint. Now let's not pretend all hosts were saints. Far from it. Some hosts took advantage of the system, inviting guests only to poison them, rob them, or recruit them into bizarre feuds. The guest right tradition was sacred, but not unbreakable. Just ask the victims of the infamous Black Dinner of 1440 in Scotland, where two young nobles were invited to dine at Edinburgh Castle, only to be served a black bull's head, a symbol of death, arrested mid-meal, and promptly executed. Hospitality, it turns out, had an expiration date, and it was shorter than the cheese they served. So where does that leave you? You spent the night crammed between a wool merchant who talks in his sleep and a pilgrim who smells like dried fish and penance. Your host is now hovering near the fire, expectantly. It's time to leave, but not before you offer a gift, a blessing, or at the very least, a thank you rhyme, even if it's just something like, "Thank thee, dear Ulrich, for your bread so thick. I shall dream of it whenever I feel sick." You nod. You back out of the hall. And then, as you reach the dirt road and take a deep, fresh breath of manure-scented morning air, you feel strangely grateful. You survived. You were fed. You now have a new rash. And somewhere, deep in your bones, you understand that medieval hospitality wasn't about comfort. It was about survival. It was about community, obligation, fear of divine retribution, and occasionally, just a desire to show off your new pewter cups. You continue down the road. Your next stop? A local noble's manor house rumored to be extremely welcoming, which could mean roast duck and harp music, or a polite stabbing over disputed land rights. Either way, you can't wait to see what's for dinner. You blink twice and realize you've been walking for an hour under a sun that wants revenge, but your feet aren't complaining because they're too busy developing medieval versions of calluses and existential dread. The inn's fine print, no refunds, no band-aids, echoes in your mind as you approach a manor house looming on a small hill, like some aristocratic Pokemon ready to battle. You arrive at the gate. No automated buzzer, just two bored guards staring at you like you're the entertainment for their morning shift. They glance at your ragged cloak, mismatched hose, and decidedly unpolished boots. You suddenly regret not spending your last coins on a haircut. "State your business," one guard says without much interest, a phrase that, in medieval speak, could mean anything from "tell us your name" to "are you smuggling goat cheese?" You explain you're a traveler, following a road to refresh your bladder and maybe your senses. They exchange yawns and grunt, then motion you inside. The manor's courtyard opens up, with a modest stable, a half-healed cobblestone path, and a fountain that probably hasn't worked since the Black Death. A couple of servants glance your way, one with curiosity, another with suspicion. One whispers to the other, "That one smells like barley mash and regret." Before you step inside, take a moment to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this mildly exhilarating stroll through medieval survival tactics. No, really, do it now. We spent 3 solid hours narrating behavior that would make a modern-day Airbnb host run screaming. So drop a thumbs up before you regret waking up tomorrow and deciding history isn't for you after all. They accompany you down a hallway that smells like old wood and fresh tension. Tapestries line the walls, boasting scenes of hunts, biblical parables, and what looks suspiciously like an early draft of your last haircut. You suppress a sneeze and remember why you froze when you spotted those guards. This place is important. You're clearly not supposed to just walk in. Suddenly you're in the great hall, massive hearth roaring, tables laden with things you vaguely recognize, a chicken that once squawked, some faded greens, a suspicious loaf. There are long bench tables seating a dozen villagers, a group of traveling minstrels tuning instruments, and at the high table, 3 figures of indeterminate cousinhood holding goblets that might be gold. Their expressions are polite, but you'd swear one of them has eyes trained on your shoes. Too shiny? Too shabby? A sharp-eyed woman in rich velvet strides forward. She introduces herself, Lady Marguerite, no nonsense, with that face you cross the street to avoid in Duncan. She asks about your journey. You say the road was long, the inns questionable, the boots literally leaking. She raises an eyebrow but gestures to a servant who approaches with a bowl of steaming broth and some stale bread. Still, better than the last inn. You gratefully accept before realizing that medieval etiquette demands enthusiastic gratitude. You gulp your broth, nod sagely, make noise, and repeat something like "splendid," even though it tastes like lukewarm cardboard soup. Applause quietly ensues from nearby guests, and one of your neighboring diners gives you a pity grin. Time ticks on. The minstrels start playing. Something tuneful, but you could swear one of the notes was flat, or maybe that was the sensation in your teeth when the soup hit them. Conversation is polite. You compliment the tapestry. What a vivid depiction of a boar hunt. Lady Marguerite stiffens slightly. Apparently they didn't go hunting. That's art, which costs money and was clearly commissioned to impress, not to start a conversation with wandering vagabonds. You take a mental note, observe, say nice things, but don't presume. The concept of status, not your current blister-elevated status, but social rank, lingers in every glance, gesture, and clink of goblets. Guests are seated deliberately, high-born near the hearth, low-born nearer to the back, even lower near the door, in case things go south and they need easy access to the latrine. The seating chart isn't written down, of course. That would be too civilized. It's all subtle cues, cloak linings, the tilt of your hat, how quickly you blush when Lady M asks about your travels. Between courses, Lady Marguerite leans forward to ask if you've any tales. Tales. Stories. Something dramatic, polite, and vaguely tied to growing corn, rebelling serfs, or not wronging your neighbors. You start telling about that time you lost your horse in a marsh, complete with dramatic hand gestures. They listen. They laugh at the right times. One of them, Lord Geoffrey, speaks up. "Most entertaining," he says. Your confidence pulses. This is hospitality at its peak. You're playing a role now, a performer in a medieval play, and the next scene depends on your ability to appease the audience. More food arrives. Game pie, maybe rabbit, maybe disappointment, cheese that squeaks when you bite it. Some fruit you hope wasn't grown on manure. It's louder now in the hall. Music. Discussion of political alliances. We must secure the trade route through Normandy, and overheard talk of the king's new tax. One guest quietly mentions a plague rumor on the edges of the kingdom. Nobody panics, but they lean in. A collective hush. Hospitality here includes not only ale and blankets, but also the relay of rumors, gossip, and strategic information. You're not just eating, you're exchanging intel. What do you exchange in return? Well, you have that story now, your polite thanks, and maybe some observation about how fine their tapestries are. Good hosts note these things. They don't want an overbearing guest, just one who's grateful, quiet, and plays their part. Lady Marguerite nods, eyes narrowing with approval. The rest of the table relaxes. Your pulse slows, you're surviving again. Hours pass. The fire dies down. Music softens. The hall empties. The guests depart, quiet nods, whispered thanks, leaving you with a servant who guides you to the guest chamber, a modest room with straw mattress, a lantern, a wooden chest that creaks ominously, and a window that actually opens. You roll up your cloak, slide your feet into what passes for slippers, and climb onto the straw bed. It's not your home, but no rats tonight. No other guests. Just you, in a room where the warmth of polite detachment lingers in the air. As you drift toward sleep, you reflect, medieval hospitality isn't about comfort. It's a structured dance of obligation. Serve well, speak well, show respect, leave before you outstay your welcome. The host shows generosity while keeping control. The guest performs civility while hoping to avoid fresh bedding from a pigsty. It's a delicate balance. A game of survival disguised as courtesy. And now you sleep, lulled not by the rustle of turns in a paperback thriller, but by the soft creak of wood, the scent of pitch and beeswax in a lantern, and the comforting knowledge that you managed to make it through another chapter of this absurd hospitality epic. You wake up to the gentle sound of someone screaming. Not dramatically, mind you. Not blood-curdling. Just a calm, consistent shriek, like someone saw a mouse or remembered they left the turnips boiling. You blink against the early morning light filtering through a grimy window that looks like it was last cleaned sometime during the Norman conquest. Outside, chickens are arguing about something existential, and a goose stares at you with the dead eyes of someone who's seen things. Horrible things. You're still in Lady Marguerite's manor. Your back hurts. Your leg is asleep. And your pillow smells like someone used it to mop up a minor tragedy. Still, you weren't stabbed in your sleep. So by medieval standards, that's practically a spa day. You shuffle down the corridor, passing two servants whispering about how the stew's off again, and step back into the grand hall. The fire's out. The glamour has gone. You're catching the manor at its most vulnerable, the morning after mess, where tapestries look slightly less regal and you finally notice that the goblets are dented and the floor's been sticky for centuries. Breakfast is being laid out. Laid out in this case means a chunk of hard bread, a hunk of cheese that's fighting for its life against mold, and something pretending to be ale. No pancakes. No syrup. No apology. You sit. You chew. You pretend the bread isn't trying to break your molars. A servant politely informs you that your stay has been a pleasure and that your horse, you don't have one, is ready. Translation: time to leave before we run out of excuses. But wait. Today's not just any day. It's market day, which, in a medieval village, is the equivalent of a minor holiday, a major social experiment, and a breeding ground for petty theft. You decide to stick around a little longer. After all, what better way to understand hospitality than to watch it unfold between people who don't own enough cutlery to be fussy about it? You follow the crowd through the gate and down a muddy road that could double as a foot massage if you enjoy wet pebbles and regret. The village is already buzzing. Carts are rolling in. Chickens are being haggled over like Faberge eggs. Someone's selling authentic relics, all of which look suspiciously like animal bones and wishful thinking. But here's where it gets interesting. Because medieval hospitality didn't stop at manor houses and monasteries. Oh no. It oozed into the marketplace, where everyone pretended to be nicer than they were. Strangers were offered samples. Travelers were asked about their journey, which was code for, "Are you going to buy something or just breathe on my apples?" Vendors offered small cloths to clean your hands before touching the goods, not out of kindness, but because everyone was filthy and the plague was never more than a decade away. You see a butcher toss a rag to a customer, smiling. The customer nods gratefully, uses it, and returns it without realizing it's been used to wipe down several carcasses and at least one goat. But that's hospitality here, performative, necessary, and vaguely threatening. The village tavern is open, too, a smoky hole of indecision and lukewarm ale. You step inside and immediately regret it. The smell hits you first, part beer, part sweat, part something unholy that may once have been a stew ingredient. A bard is tuning a lute in the corner with the enthusiasm of someone being paid in soup. You take a seat. A serving woman slams down a tankard and mutters something that might be a welcome or might be a warning. It's hard to tell. You sip. It's wet. That's about the best thing you can say. Then it happens. A man bursts through the door, dusty and out of breath, announcing that he's a messenger of the crown, and he's seeking shelter for the night. Everyone freezes. This is a test of hospitality. Do you help him? Do you feed him? Do you give him a bed? Or do you smile, nod, and let the manner deal with it? Lady Marguerite's steward is summoned. He frowns. "We weren't expecting anyone," he says, which is medieval code for "we don't have enough leftover pie crust for this nonsense." Still, he gestures politely. Of course, the manor welcomes travelers. It's all very courteous, but you can feel the tension. Every guest costs food. Every meal costs labor. Every night risks slice. And yet, refusal is worse. It means losing face, status, and, potentially, divine favor. Medieval people believed that turning away a stranger could mean turning away a saint in disguise. Or worse, someone with connections. You follow the drama back to the manor. The messenger is given the same guest room you slept in, which is awkward because you left a pair of socks in there that were, shall we say, biologically active. You smile tightly. He nods. There's an understanding between guests in a pre-sanitation world: never comment on smells, and never ask questions you don't want fungal answers to. Dinner that night is a little fancier than yours had been. They brought out the good trenchers, stale, but with less obvious weevils. A roasted bird appears. No one's sure if it's chicken, pigeon, or wishful thinking. And, of course, the guest is offered the best portion, which in this case means the part with the least visible feathers. As a secondary guest now, a sort of leftover relic from yesterday, you're demoted to the quieter end of the table, where servants occasionally whisper gossip and someone's trying to pawn off a fifth-hand lute. You nod politely, eat whatever's brown and chewable, and remind yourself you are witnessing a performance. A delicate dance of generosity and resource management. That's the thing about medieval hospitality. It wasn't about being nice. It was about keeping the social machinery oiled with bread, flattery, and forced cheer. It was about offering food not because you wanted to, but because not doing so might make you the talk of the region, or worse, labeled ungodly. You excuse yourself after the second course, citing stomach omens, which seems polite enough. Back in the guest room, the new guy is already asleep. You curl up on a woven mat near the fireplace and listen to the wind batter the shutters. It's not comfortable, but you're warm, unpoisoned, and still technically welcome. And that, in medieval terms, is luxury. Tomorrow, you'll leave. You'll find another town, another bed, another plate of turnip mush served with half a smile. But for tonight, you're reminded of an ancient truth. In a world without central heating, sealed roads, or Netflix, a fire and a roof over your head aren't just comforts. They're lifelines. And the people offering them? They're not just hosts. They're survivors. Just like you. You leave before dawn, because nothing screams thank you for your medieval hospitality like disappearing silently into the fog without saying goodbye. You trudge down the dirt road with your bread bundle swinging and your dignity dragging somewhere behind you. The manor fades into the mist behind you, and you're pretty sure Lady Marguerite won't miss you, except perhaps to comment that you snored like a dying warhorse. There's no map, no GPS, just the road, the cold, and your burning eyes. You begin walking toward the next village, wherever that may be, because direction in the Middle Ages is more of a suggestion than a plan. Your travel options are limited: walk, or hope someone with a cart offers you a ride and doesn't rob you halfway to Gloucester. The forest looms ahead. It's beautiful, in the same way a bear trap covered in moss is beautiful. Trees twist like arthritic fingers. Crows caw overhead, possibly gossiping about you. You clutch your cloak tighter and remind yourself that in medieval Europe, forests weren't nature retreats. They were the places you went to die poetically or accidentally become folklore. But you must press on. The next village lies somewhere past these haunted-looking trees, and you've heard that it's known for its generous friary and excellent pottage, which is medieval marketing code for you can chew it without crying. Eventually, as if summoned by sheer stubbornness, the village appears. It's small, very small. You count maybe 9 buildings, all tilted like they're trying to escape the wind. Smoke curls from a chimney. A mangy dog gives you a once-over and decides you're not worth barking at. You step carefully around puddles that are suspiciously warm, either animal urine or something worse. The center of the village is where all the action happens. There's a blacksmith hammering something metallic, probably a horseshoe or a very small confession. A woman is stirring a pot outside, eyeing you like you might steal it. Children play nearby with sticks, mud, and trauma. You approach a thatched roof and that's optimistically calling itself the King's Rest, despite the fact that if a king ever came here, he would immediately renounce the throne and become a goat herder. You push the door open. The interior greets you with a familiar smell, damp wood, stale beer, and defeat. A man at the bar raises an eyebrow but says nothing. The innkeeper nods in your direction, a nod that says, "You again," even if it's your first time here. You ask about a room, and the innkeeper gives you a look. Not a suspicious look, more like a math problem. He's calculating whether you're worth the effort. You offer coin. He shrugs. Hospitality here is less about divine duty and more about economic necessity. If you pay, you stay. If you can't, he pretends not to see you. That's the charm of lower-tier medieval hospitality. No illusions, no sanctimonious smiles. Just a dirty bed and no questions asked. You're shown to a room upstairs, a room that was clearly never meant to be slept in, only tolerated. The floor tilts. The mattress is stuffed with straw and secrets. There's a single window with a crack that howls when the wind hits it just right. You place your pack down, sit on the edge of the bed, and feel a spring jab into your soul. Still, you're safe. Or at least not in immediate danger. And that, again, is the theme of medieval travel. Not being dead is the best-case scenario. You come back down for the evening meal, which is apparently being served communally. A bench. A shared bowl. An assortment of humans who look like they're either famished or contemplating witchcraft. You take a seat. The meal is pottage, again. Always pottage. It's the default setting of the Middle Ages. A sludge of grains, root vegetables, maybe a meat scrap if someone's pet died recently. You eat it because you're starving. You eat it because you can't afford not to. You eat it because it's hot, vaguely nutritious, and doesn't talk back. Next to you sits a man with a face that's seen wind, war, and probably 3 divorces. He introduces himself as Thomas. He's a cooper, makes barrels, drinks from barrels, occasionally hides in barrels. He tells you about the local friary, where the monks offer bread and shelter to the needy, so long as they're not too needy or too heretical. You thank him, and he offers you a sip from his flask. You accept. It burns all the way down and may or may not be legal. He smiles. You've just passed another medieval hospitality ritual, alcohol bonding. It's like networking, but with worse hygiene. Later, you find your way back to the room, but not before stepping into something outside the privy that reminds you why you prefer indoor plumbing. You wash your boots with hay and shame, then crawl into bed, fully clothed, and wrap your cloak tight. You drift off to the sounds of someone vomiting 2 rooms over and a mouse in the wall gnawing through what's probably part of the foundation. But again, you're not in the rain. You're not in the stocks. You're not being chased by wolves or an angry miller's wife. You are, by medieval standards, deeply pampered. The next day, you visit the friary. It's a humble stone building surrounded by gardens, chickens, and a smell of spiritual exhaustion. A monk greets you with a smile that looks like it's been stapled to his face since 1203. He offers bread, water, a place to rest. It's quiet here. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you wonder if penance includes a vow of personality. You ask about hospitality. He nods and recites something from a very dusty Bible about caring for strangers. You nod politely, your mouth full of bread that tastes like ceiling tile. Still, it's free. And clean. And nobody has asked you your business or whether you've got lice, which, frankly, is a step up from everywhere else. You stay the night, sleeping in a stone cell with a straw mat and a view of absolutely nothing. But the silence? The silence is golden. No bar fights. No screaming pigs. Just peace. And that's the strangest part about all of this. For all the chaos and discomfort, medieval hospitality wasn't just a set of rules. It was a lifeline. A culture, a performance, a survival tactic. Everyone needed help sometimes, even the lords, even the clergy, even you, walking bundle of questionable life choices. The trick was to know how to play your part. Be humble. Be grateful. Don't smell too weird. Don't insult the bread. Don't ask why the soup is gray. And in return, you might get a roof, a meal, and maybe even a story worth telling. You're welcome. You wake up with straw in your hair, a dull ache in your back, and a monk gently ringing a bell outside your door, like an apologetic ghost trying to maintain some semblance of order. You're still in the friary, and the cell you slept in somehow feels both monastic and mildly prison-like, which, to be fair, is probably the vibe they were going for. It's early. The kind of early that makes you question whether you've died, and this is purgatory. You shuffle outside, blinking into the gray dawn, and join the other guests and brothers in what can only be described as communal mumbling with bread. Breakfast is bread and thin ale, again. Or maybe that's what lunch will be too. It's hard to tell in a place where time is measured not by clocks but by the ringing of bells, the angle of shadows, and the increasingly urgent rumbling of your stomach. One of the monks, Brother Adalbert, who looks like he was carved from the same stone as the walls, pulls you aside. Not in a threatening way, more like someone about to deliver either wisdom or a mild lecture. He asks you how you slept. You lie and say peacefully. He lies and says the guest bed is very comfortable. The entire conversation is a polite duel of shared denial. But then he offers something unexpected. He invites you to help serve the next group of travelers. Apparently, a band of pilgrims is arriving later, and the friary, following the rule of Saint Benedict, is required to receive them as though they were Christ himself. Which, if Christ had foot rot and a donkey with digestive issues, would be eerily accurate. So you spend the morning preparing. You sweep. You slice bread. You watch as another monk adds water to the soup pot for the third time, transforming it from thick to symbolic. There's a hierarchy here, not one of power, but of who's trusted to stir the pot without falling in. You are not yet trusted. As the sun rises higher, the pilgrims begin to arrive. The first group stumbles in like extras from a very underfunded biblical drama. Dusty, red-faced, covered in blisters and spiritual confusion. They've walked for days, from where, no one's entirely sure, because medieval geography is more poetry than science. Their leader, a man named Gerard, says they're on their way to Canterbury, though one woman insists they're heading to Santiago de Compostela. You nod politely. It's clearly one of those pilgrimages that started with faith and ended with Google Maps not having been invented yet. Hospitality, now, becomes theater. You and the brothers line up. You bow. You welcome them with the exact same words you've heard recited 5 times now, Pax Vobiscum. You are welcome here. The pilgrims respond with the enthusiasm of people who just want to sit down and not cry in public. They're shown to the refectory, which is a fancy word for a cold stone room with benches. Water is poured. Bread is offered. Soup is ladled. And you, somehow, are promoted to bread distributor, a job that involves smiling and making sure no one hoards the good crusts. Because yes, even in a holy space, there are politics over who gets the corner piece. Gerard tries to make conversation. He asks where you're from. You panic and say the north, which in medieval terms could mean anything from Scotland to the part of the village with the bad sheik. He nods, like that explains everything. The pilgrims eat. Some pray. One falls asleep mid-bite. The friary has done its job. They're fed, sheltered, and mildly spiritually guilt-tripped. You help clean up, which mostly means scraping bowls and pretending not to gag at what someone did to their portion of turnips. Later, you overhear the monks discussing the logistics of having this many guests. It's not easy. The friary doesn't have endless food or space. But hospitality is a sacred duty, something that transcends mere survival. It's about community, charity, the constant hope that, should the roles be reversed, someone else would ladle soup into your bowl with at least a minimum amount of contempt. The pilgrims stay the night, sprawled across the dormitory floor in a sea of snoring, aching limbs. You sleep in the hallway, propped against a cold wall, using your cloak as a pillow and your regrets as a blanket. At midnight, you're woken by the sound of someone loudly asking if they've been bitten by a demon. You roll over, just to flee. Probably. The next day, you leave with the pilgrims. Why? Because staying too long in one place makes you suspicious. Also, one of the brothers asked if you'd like to consider joining the order, and that's a bit too much commitment for someone who's never successfully grown herbs or memorized Latin. So you walk. You walk alongside the pilgrims, whose feet look like someone's been using them for target practice. Gerard insists on singing. Badly. The woman who thought they were going to Spain now insists this is all symbolic. You quietly regret your life choices. At night, you camp beneath a tree. Dinner is hard bread and regret. You talk about saints. You argue about directions. You wonder if anyone in history has ever been this cold, this tired, or this tempted to just lie down and let the Middle Ages win. But in the morning, once again, you're fed. A farmer, seeing your sad caravan, offers a jug of milk and some onions. Not exactly a Michelin star, but you thank him like he just handed you a steak dinner. Because this right here is the forgotten rule of hospitality. Not the grand halls or the embroidered pillows. Not the church rules or the noble performances. It's this, the moan with 2 onions giving you 1. The woman handing over her last bit of cheese. The tired smile. The shared fire. The assumption that, in a cold and brutal world, the least we can do is not let each other starve. You chew your onion. You sip warm milk. You are, once again, not dead. And that, once again, is victory. You wake up in a ditch. Again. This is your new normal. At this point, your standards for sleep have sunk so low they could trip over a slug. The ground is damp, your cloak is stiff with dried soup, you think it was soup, and your back feels like it was politely stomped on by several small saints. The sun is rising, but it's less of a sunrise and more of a slow, reluctant smudge across the sky. The pilgrims are already packing up. Gerard, bless him, is still humming that same off-key hymn that sounds suspiciously like someone trying to remember how songs work. You grunt a greeting and begin the sacred ritual of dusting yourself off, adjusting your shame, and pretending this was all part of the plan. Today, you'll pass through another village. A bigger one this time. It has a proper market and even rumors of a tavern with a roof that leaks only selectively. You walk, your feet numb, your legs resigned. You stop feeling blisters because your blisters have formed unions and are now negotiating contracts with your bones. On the road, you see others. A merchant with a cart full of oddly shaped turnips. A widow leading a donkey that looks like it's seen war. A group of children chasing a wooden hoop like it owes the money. Everyone is on the move because in the medieval world, staying still was suspicious. Wandering, that was just life. Hospitality in the big village is different. Less sacred, more transactional. You're no longer a guest in the divine sense. You're just another mouth, another potential problem. The gatekeeper eyes you the way a bouncer might regard someone clearly too poor to pay the cover charge. You're let in, but only after answering several suspicious questions and agreeing not to commit any light heresy. The market square is buzzing, not in a pleasant, festival kind of way, but more like a hornet's nest that's trying to sell you pickled fish. Merchants shout. Geese honk. A mun is selling dubious potions that promise to cure everything from baldness to mortality. Spoiler, they do neither. You and the pilgrims break off for a while. You've grown tired of Gerard's hymns and the woman's constant complaints about how this doesn't feel holy enough. You find the tavern, the Broken Stag, named after either a very specific hunting accident or the local tax system. Inside, it's dim, smoky. Smells like beer, sweat, and the ghost of at least one bad decision. The barkeep is a woman with forearms that could crush walnuts and a voice like someone who spent years yelling at pigs. She sizes you up and asks, coin or chores? You blink. She points to a broom. Ah, the lesser-known hospitality model, work for bed. It's not charity. It's not kindness. It's medieval capitalism, but with more sweeping and fewer breaks. You sweep. You sweep so much you start hallucinating dust bunnies that whisper advice. Eventually, she hands you a bowl of stew, actual stew, with chunks of meat you don't have to squint at, and a key to the smallest, least disgusting room upstairs. You nearly weak. That night, you sleep like royalty, which, in medieval terms, means no rats actively chewing on your toes. The next morning, you're woken not by a monk or a bell, but by an argument in the street. 2 men are shouting about pigs. Whose pigs, whose fence, whose fault? It escalates quickly. Someone throws a cabbage. A priest walks by and mutters something about original sin. You decide to move on. But first, you stop at the church. Every village has one. It's often the biggest building, sometimes the only one made of stone, and always about 3 repairs away from total collapse. You step inside. The priest is delivering a sermon to a congregation of 6, 4 of whom are asleep and 1 of whom is definitely drunk. The church smells like incense and mildew, and the candles flicker like they're trying to escape. Afterwards, you speak with the priest. He's young, which means he still believes in things. He offers you a crust of bread and a lesson about God's mercy. You thank him, chew quietly, and try not to look like someone who's fantasizing about stealing the communion wine. He tells you that in this region, there's an old tradition. Once a week, the church hosts travelers, beggars, and other unfortunate souls for a shared meal. Fraternal charity, he calls it. Controlled chaos, you call it. You decide to stay for the night. The church hall fills with people, a blind fiddler who may or may not be faking, a woman with a cart of mushrooms and opinions, 3 very quiet children who might be siblings or a small cult. Everyone sits on long benches. The food is ladled out, lentils, barley, a single chicken leg that's passed around like it's a relic. It's loud, it's chaotic, and it's the most alive you've felt in weeks. Because here's the thing they don't tell you in textbooks, medieval hospitality was never tidy. It was loud. It was improvised. It was people trying, clumsily, imperfectly, to take care of each other in a world designed to kill you by 35. You sleep in the church loft that night. The rafters creak. Something flutters. Probably a bat. Or a demon. At this point, you're not picky. The next day, you decide to test your luck again. You leave the village, heading toward a manor rumored to be especially generous to travelers. According to the barkeep, they'll feed you, house you, and only judge you a little. The manor is large, stone, intimidating. There are guards, which is never a great sign, but you approach anyway. You introduce yourself as a pilgrim. You use the sacred words, "I seek shelter for the night." The steward looks you over. He's old, pale, and built like a lecturing skeleton. "We are a Christian household," he says, "and charity is our law." Then he sighs like he just swallowed a toad. You're allowed inside. The rules are strict. No noise after dark, no speaking unless spoken to, and definitely no looking at Lady Eleanor's tapestry for too long. You nod like someone who can definitely control where their eyes go. The meal is formal. You sit at the far end of a very long table, so far from the fire that your soup crusts over before you can eat it. The family dines in silence. There is bread. There is meat. There is a hierarchy so rigid you can feel it in your molars. You are fed, but you are not welcomed. And that's another forgotten rule. Hospitality wasn't always kindness. Sometimes it was performance. A duty. An obligation to appear generous, while secretly hoping you'd vanish before breakfast. Later that night, you're shown to the servant quarters. It smells like damp wool and broken dreams. You sleep fitfully, wondering if you were more comfortable in the ditch. But in the morning, surprise, they offer you breakfast. Not a feast. Just more bread, a bit of cheese, and a look that says, "Please leave before the Lord wakes up." You leave. You are full. You are intact. You are, miraculously, still not dead. You are starting to understand. Hospitality wasn't about comfort. It wasn't about convenience. It was about surviving. About holding onto some scrap of humanity in a world that constantly tried to tear it away. It was a ritual, a shield, a hope, and, sometimes, if you were lucky, a bowl of soup that didn't fight back. You wake up next to a dead fire, covered in dew, face to face with a chicken. The chicken blinks once, as if judging your entire life, then waddles off to do whatever terrifying things chickens did before domestication made them slightly less velociraptor-y. Your legs feel like 2 bundles of twigs held together by spite. Your back cracks when you sit up. You discover a pebble has embedded itself into your shoulder like a tiny, passive-aggressive dagger. But congratulations, you're alive. And in the 14th century, that's basically a holiday. You stretch. Bad idea. Pain blossoms like medieval poetry, florid, dramatic, and slightly unnecessary. The sky is already bright. Birds are singing like tiny maniacs with something to prove, and somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, either calling people to prayer or announcing someone else died from a slightly aggressive cough. Hard to say. Today's plan, and by plan, we mean vague hope disguised as intention, is to reach another noble manor. This one belongs to a minor baron known mostly for his ability to throw feasts while still somehow avoiding eye contact with any of his peasants. You've heard rumors. Big halls. Long tables. Cheese. Real cheese, not the peasant version which is just milk plus time and sorrow. You walk. Your shoes, once sturdy, now more concept than footwear, flap sadly with each step. You pass fields where peasants are already at work, their backs bent like question marks, their expression somewhere between resigned and murderous. They glance up at you. You nod, offering that universal gesture of "I don't live here, don't worry, I'm just passing through." A child throws a clump of something suspiciously squishy in your general direction. You dodge. Barely. Welcome to medieval public relations. By midday, you reach a river crossing. There's a toll. Of course there's a toll. The toll collector is asleep under a tree, his mouth open, flies treating him like a buffet. You stand there awkwardly. A sign next to him reads, "1 groat or equivalent goods. No pigs." You consider waking him, but another traveler leans in and whispers, "Just drop a button in the basket and go." He won't notice. You don't have a button. You don't even have dignity at this point. But you rummage in your pouch and find a bent nail and something that may have once been a seed. You toss them in the basket and cross the bridge, your guilt evaporating somewhere between desperate and technically bartering. Finally, you see the manor. It's huge, imposing, the kind of place that could either welcome you or launch arrows at your face, depending on how the steward feels that day. You approach the gatehouse, attempting to look holy, humble, and non-threatening, like a pilgrim who's seen things but is also very polite about it. A guard eyes you from a tower. "Name," he calls. You freeze. Names are complicated. You've used several since this journey began. You pick one at random. "Stephen," you say. "Of the road." He snorts. "Purpose. Seeking shelter. Rest. Possibly porridge." There's a pause. Then the gate creaks open, just enough for you to squeeze in. Victory. Inside, the courtyard is bustling. Servants rushing. Dogs barking. Chickens, again, being menaces. You're taken to a side door, where a steward with a neck ruff so stiff it looks like punishment asks you a series of questions with the emotional range of a tax form. He logs your presence in a ledger that's mostly ink stains and passive-aggressive notes about that man who smelled like fish. You're granted guest status, level 2. This means no private room, but a spot in the second-tier guest hall, also known as that room with the tapestries and the draft. You nod graciously. You've slept in a puddle before. This is fine. Before the evening meal, you're allowed to wash. Sort of. You're led to a wooden tub filled with lukewarm water and herbs meant to mask the smell of road. You scrub with a cloth that smells like soap's distant cousin and try not to cry when you find new blisters on your feet. After, you're handed a tunic that once belonged to someone more fashionable and considerably less shaped like a walking injury. The evening meal is the kind of event nobles love, elaborate, theatrical, and full of foods no one can pronounce. You sit at the long table, way at the end, near the people who cough too much and the servants who pretend they're not eating leftovers. The Baron enters. Everyone stands. He waves dismissively, like a man allergic to basic human interaction, and sits in a carved chair that looks more throne than seat. His wife, Lady Omengard, who looks like she could order an execution with just her left eyebrow, sits beside him. Dinner is served. There's meat. Actual meat. Duck, maybe. Or very confident chicken. There's bread. There's wine so watered down, it's technically just grape-flavored guilt. You eat cautiously, watching the others, mimicking their hand gestures, their posture, their vague expressions of politeness meets misery. You try not to talk. Talking risks discovery. Talking risks being asked who your liege lord is, or whether you can read Latin, or what your opinion is on the Great Schism. You have no liege. You think Latin is a scam. And you're fairly sure the Great Schism is either a church crisis or a hernia. After dinner, entertainment. A bard arrives. He's tired, his lute is missing a string, and he sings ballads with the energy of a man who's been paid in turnips and silence. His songs are all tragic, women dying, knights regretting things, shepherds losing sheep and then dying of sadness. Everyone listens with the quiet intensity of people hoping no one makes them dance. You sneak out early. The guest room is cold. You find a spot near the fire, or rather, near the pile of ashes that used to be a fire, and wrap yourself in a borrowed blanket. You hear snores, coughs, someone muttering in their sleep about taxes. This is hospitality, noble edition. It's richer, cleaner, more orchestrated. But it's still the same idea. Feed the stranger, house the weary, pretend we're all in this together. You sleep, briefly, because at midnight, someone wakes you. It's the steward. He whispers that there's a traveler at the gate, ragged, limping, possibly mad. The Baron has gone to bed. The servants are busy. Would you, perhaps, as someone who was once in that position, go and speak with him? You do. The traveler is a wreck. Clothes in tatters. Eyes wild. He says nothing at first. Just breathes like the world is a weight on his chest. Then, quietly, he says, "I've walked from the sea." You nod. You know that look. That exhaustion that sits deeper than bone. You take him inside. Offer him your blanket. You give him bread from your own pouch. He eats slowly, as though chewing is remembering. This is the part of hospitality no one writes poems about. The quiet mercy. The moment where one tired soul helps another, not because it's noble, but because it's the only thing left to do. You don't sleep again that night. You sit by the ashes, watching the fireless hearth, listening to the sounds of a house that pretends it's better than suffering, but isn't. And in the cold silence of a noble hall, you understand. The rules of hospitality weren't just laws or traditions. They were survival spells. Ancient, desperate rituals against the chaos of the world. And in that moment, you are not a guest. You are a guardian. A keeper of the oldest kindness there is, food, shelter, and silence. You wake up to the sound of hooves clopping on stone, a steady, deliberate rhythm that suggests someone important is either arriving, leaving, or dramatically trotting in circles to assert dominance. Light filters through the cracks in the wooden shutters, casting golden stripes across your borrowed blanket and the half-asleep pilgrim you shared it with. He smells like boiled turnips and secrets, and he's drooling slightly on your elbow. You shift, painfully, like a bundle of regrets wrapped in bones. Every joint clicks. Your neck feels like it's been folded by an angry librarian. The cold stone floor below has done things to your spine that would make a chiropractor scream in Latin. Outside, the manor is already alive. Servants scurry about with the urgency of people trying to accomplish 12 hours of work before breakfast. A cook yells about eggs. A boy runs by holding a chicken as if the chicken owes him money. You step out into the courtyard and are immediately hit with the sharp, nostalgic scent of livestock, wood smoke, and human ambition, which in the 14th century smells mostly like fear and laundry that never quite dries. You're summoned to breakfast by a maid with one eyebrow and no apparent sense of humor. She gestures at the lower table, the one near the door, and directly beneath a tapestry depicting what appears to be the world's most passive-aggressive saint. Breakfast is surprisingly decent. Bread, real, fluffy bread, not the flat sadness you're used to, soft cheese, a boiled egg that you stare at like it's a miracle, and watered-down ale that tastes like someone whispered beer into a bucket. You're eating, quietly, when the steward, yes, the one who always looks like he's got indigestion from reading Latin, slides onto the bench beside you and clears his throat in a way that suggests paperwork is incoming. "We're escorting Lady Ermengarde to the Abbey of St. Perpetua this week," he says, unwrapping a scroll with the enthusiasm of someone about to assign you an unpaid internship. She insists on having a spiritual buffer. You blink. "A what?" "A buffer," he repeats. "Someone religious-looking who can sit between her and the rest of the sinners." You have that pious squint. Translation: you look poor, tired, and quiet, which, in medieval terms, basically qualifies you as halfway to sainthood. So that's how you end up in the back of a long, creaky wagon, wedged between sacks of barley and a monk who smells like regret. Lady Ermengarde rides ahead on a white mule that seems to hate its job. The path is muddy, of course, because no journey in this world is allowed to be dry, easy, or free of ankle-deep sludge. You travel for hours. The monk beside you, Brother Gillis, talks. A lot. Mostly about the relics at the abbey. There's a toe of St. Judith, a feather allegedly from the Archangel Michael, and a handkerchief that someone once used to mop the brow of a bishop who sneezed near a miracle. You nod politely and hope he'll fall asleep. He does not. At dusk, you arrive at the Abbey of St. Perpetua, perched atop a hill like a smug limestone cake. The air smells of lavender, rain, and something faintly medicinal. You're ushered inside, along with the noble party, and immediately handed off to a younger monk whose smile is far too enthusiastic for someone who has taken a vow of silence. He leads you through halls that echo like regret and opens a door to the guest chamber. Now, you've stayed in barns, cellars, and once under a wheelbarrow. But this is next-level hospitality. a straw mattress with actual linens, a jug of clean water, a tiny wooden cross on the wall, like a decorative reminder that God is definitely watching you change. You collapse onto the bed. It groans. You groan. Somewhere in the abbey, a bell rings, softly, politely, like a gentle nudge from the divine. Dinner is held in a refectory, a long, narrow hall where monks eat in complete silence while one of them reads aloud from scripture. The meal is humble, lentils, dark bread, and something that might be fish, but also might be an interpretive concept to fish. You eat gratefully. No one talks. No one coughs on you. You don't get kicked by a goat. It's practically a spa. Afterwards, you're allowed to walk the cloister, a square path lined with arches and illuminated by flickering lanterns. The stone underfoot is smooth. The air is cool. The silence is so pure it feels like a physical thing, draped around you like a holy blanket. For a moment, you forget the blisters, the aches, the endless noise of the road. Here, hospitality is sacred, practiced, built into the bones of the building. Every corner whispers, you are safe. For now. That night, you sleep like the dead. And in the morning, you wake up to the smell of fresh bread and something miraculous, a hot basin of water. Brother Gillis is waiting, of course. He insists on showing you the chapel, the bones of saints, the relics, the beeswax candles imported from somewhere expensive. You nod, smile, pretend you're not contemplating hiding in the cellar just to avoid another hour of holy trivia. Lady Omengard is glowing. She's been bathed in incense, praise, and filtered light. She announces that the abbey is refreshing and adequately solemn. The Baron Steward gives you a side glance that could sandwood. Before leaving, there is a gift. Not to you, obviously. To the abbey. A purse of coins, given with ceremony. The steward calls it thanks. You call it, please keep pretending we're holy. On the way back, the weather turns. It rains. Of course it does. The sky opens like a drunken bard mid-song, and the road turns into a soup of mud and disappointment. You trudge through it, soaked to the bones, the wagon groaning under the weight of what noble expectations. That night, there is no manor, no abbey, just a roadside inn, barely held together by moss, damp wood, and optimism. The sign out front reads, "The Sleeping Duck," and the duck in question looks like it's seen some things. Inside, the air is thick with smoke, laughter, and unwashed bodies. You are now in the third type of hospitality. Not divine. Not noble. Commercial. The innkeeper is a woman who looks like she's been through 3 marriages, 1 war, and at least 1 attempted exorcism. She asks how you'll pay. You show her a coin the steward gave you. She bites it, nods, and offers you a bed in the loft, 1 of 6, all stuffed with straw and despair. You take it. Dinner is loud. Meat stew, thick ale, bread so hard it could legally be considered a weapon. You eat fast, ignoring the drunk merchant shouting about tariffs and the bard attempting a song that keeps devolving into hiccups. But in its own way, this too is hospitality. Not sacred, not clean, but warm, full of noise, stories, and food made with actual seasoning. You fall asleep to the sound of someone throwing up in the courtyard. And yet, you sleep better than you have in days. Because here's the quiet truth, whispered behind every monastery gate, manor door, and ensign nailed to a soggy tree. Hospitality wasn't just about rules. It was a dance, a survival strategy, a way to say, I see you. You exist. And for one night, you don't have to run. Even if tomorrow, you'll be right back in the mud. You wake up with straw in your hair and a rat near your face. The rat seems politely indifferent to your existence, like a seasoned resident who's seen far worse sleeping arrangements. It glances at you, yawns and rodent, and disappears into a gap in the beams, possibly to file a complaint about your snoring. Your back is shaped like a question mark. Your mouth tastes like medieval breakfast, which is to say, it tastes like nothing except dry air, ale residue, and disappointment. Someone downstairs is already arguing about chickens. The floorboards above you creak with the weight of a mun who clearly doesn't believe in light steps or modest breakfasts. You swing your legs off the sleeping platform and stretch. A loud pop comes from somewhere in your spine, which is probably fine. You don't have time to investigate because the innkeeper is already bellowing something about, if you're not eating, you're leaving. Classic hospitality. Downstairs, the common room smells like stew, firewood, and wet dog. There is, in fact, a wet dog sleeping directly under the hearth. Its tail thumps lazily when you pass, as if to say, "You're late. The porridge is terrible today." The morning meal is served in large wooden bowls that still carry the memories of last night's stew. The innkeeper's daughter, a girl of about 10 with the emotional range of a siege engine, slaps porridge into your bowl like it personally offended her. It's hot, lumpy, and slightly too salty. But in a world without sugar or caffeine, it's practically divine. You eat, fast. There's no lingering here. The inn might offer shelter and food, but it is very clear about one thing: the longer you stay, the less welcome you are. This isn't charity. This is transactional survival. So, you move on. Today's road is muddy, again, because the weather has apparently entered its haunting phase. The wind whistles through the trees with the subtlety of a ghost auditioning for a horror play. Your cloak is damp, your shoes are now mostly concept, and your pack smells like damp bread and regret. You pass travelers. Some nod. Some don't. One man mutters something about taxes and keeps walking. A woman pulls her child closer as you pass, as if your mere presence could somehow transmit poverty. You get it. Strangers aren't always danger, but they're rarely convenient. Mid-morning, you reach a small village. No walls. No guards. Just a scattering of huts around a central green that looks like someone forgot to water it for 50 years. Chickens wander freely. A pig is trying to climb a low fence. You are not entirely sure it's failing. There's a communal oven, still warm from the dawn baking. A few women are gathered around it, speaking in tones that suggest judgment is the main course of conversation. You approach cautiously. One of them eyes you. You need something, traveler? You nod. Shelter. Just for the day. I'll move on by nightfall. The woman, possibly the alpha gossip, assesses you with the precision of someone who's seen enough human misery to know when it's contagious. Then she shrugs. Speak to Marek. He's the Reeve. The Reeve. Local authority. Tax collector. Mediator. Landlord of everyone's collective bitterness. You find him leaning against a cart, chewing on something green and unappetizing. He looks at you like he's already exhausted. We're full. You wait. He sighs. You can stay in the byre. But if the cow kicks you, that's between you and God. You thank him. Hospitality, peasant edition. The byre is warm because of the cow, mostly. It's also full of flies and smells like a stable's armpit. But it's dry, and there's straw, and the cow is surprisingly non-judgmental. You spend the afternoon watching village life unfold like a morality play with no budget. Children running barefoot through mud. Women boiling laundry. Men fixing a fence with tools that look like they've been passed down since Noah was in short pants. No one invites you in. But no one chases you off, either. That evening, you're given a bowl of stew and a wooden spoon. You eat near the communal fire. One of the elders starts singing a folk song that involves a fox, a goose, and a scandalous amount of barley. No one claps. This is entertainment, not encouragement. You sleep beside the cow. She shifts once in the night, and you wake up thinking the world is ending. But it's just her adjusting her bulk and possibly sighing at your presence. You mutter an apology. She responds with a snort that may or may not be sarcastic. And so, another day of hospitality passes. But here's the thing. The further you travel, the more it becomes clear. Hospitality isn't one thing. It's a spectrum. A shape-shifting survival ritual, adapted to fit whatever resources, or lack thereof, a place can offer. In noble manners, it's performance. In abbeys, it's sacred duty. In inns, it's commerce. And here, in this village that smells like manure and community, it's reluctant generosity. The kind that says, we don't have much, but we remember what it's like to be cold. And maybe that's the real rule of hospitality no one wrote down. You help, not because you can afford to, but because you know what it feels like when no one does. Morning comes. The cow licks your face. This is your cue to leave. You rise, stretch, thank Marek, who grunts and points at your feet as if to say don't steal anything, and continue on. By noon, you're on the road again, this time heading toward a market town, one big enough to have multiple inns, a church, and possibly a man who thinks owning 2 pigs makes him royalty. You arrive dusty, blistered, and smiling like someone who's seen enough floors to recognize a good one. The town gates are open. You pass through, just another wanderer in a world built for mud, faith, and stubborn kindness. And in the distance, maybe in the echo of the church bell or the laughter from the market square, you hear it again. The ancient, exhausted whisper of hospitality. You're not home, but you're not alone either.